Okay, so let's start now. Well, welcome to IFRI on this Monday morning. still jet lagged. Actually, we were all together in Tokyo last week, just coming back. So that's feel a bit funny to be back to Paris all together on this discussion. But very happy to be here. I'm Céline Pajon. I'm head of Japan research at the Center for Asia and Indo Pacific Studies with IFRI. And so this morning we'll have a discussion about NATO and the question that is debated a lot these days about NATO going east or not, going Asia, going Indo-Pacific, or at least working with partners in the Indo-Pacific. And indeed, last year, NATO strategic concept acknowledged China's growing influence and military modernization as significant challenges, recognizing also the Indo-Pacific region's strategic importance for the NATO organization and NATO allies. And Japan, along with other key partners of NATO in the Asia-Pacific, that is Republic of Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, they are known as AP4, Asia-Pacific 4, has pursued enhanced cooperation with the Transatlantic Alliance. The AP4 leaders participated in the NATO summit last year in Madrid. And this year in Vilnius Summit, individual tailored partnership programs were adopted to bring the cooperation to the next level. And discussions have emerged this spring regarding a potential opening of a NATO Bureau Liaison office in Tokyo. However, NATO member countries hold varying perspective on the opportunity or not, or the extent or not. The alliance should commit to the Indo-Pacific or should expand its cooperation with partners in the region. Especially sitting here in France, we know that France is taking a very cautious approach about it, with President Macron publicly opposing the opening of such a NATO office in Tokyo, and this triggered a lot of reaction and discussion in Japan. So that's one of the topics we'll discuss with our Japanese friends. So our aim this morning is to unpack the various dimensions of NATO engagement with the Indo-Pacific and with Indo-Pacific partners, and especially Japan. And to do that, I'm really delighted to welcome a stellar panel of experts and friends to address the issues. So I will quickly introduce them. First, we start with Benedetta Berti, who is in Brussels, unfortunately not with us in Paris, but thank you so much for joining. Benedetta is head of the Policy Planning Office at the Secretary General of NATO, and she is the one who actually took charge of drafting the NATO strategic concept last year. And she's also, I must say, a great academic. Beyond that, she published extensively on issues regarding European security and more. So thanks a lot for being with us, Benedetta. Very happy to have you online. Then I am delighted to welcome two esteemed Japanese academic stars in the field of international relations. So first, Michito Tsuruoka is associate professor at Keio University, and this year is also a visiting fellow at ANU, the Australian National University. You may know him also because he was formerly expert with the National Institute of Defense Studies for a long time, and is well known as the Japanese leading expert on NATO and EU-Japan's relation. So welcome back to Paris. On my left side, Yuichi Hosoya is a professor of international relations at Keio University. He actually is a founder and director of a brand new think tank or research center set up within the Keio University, the Keio Center for Strategy. So watch this space because they are going to do a lot of very interesting stuff. And he edited a book published by Springer last month, actually, on the transformation on the liberal international order. And I have the pleasure to also contribute one chapter to this book, so thank you very much. And is really the go-to person in Japan when you want to talk about international relations and great expertise. So thank you again for joining us, and then welcome back also to Paris. Last but not least, I am thrilled to welcome Eva Peshova, who is a Japan chair with the Brussels School of Governance at VUB. So Eva also published extensively on EU-Japan relations and more broadly EU-Asia relations, maritime security, and so on. And I have the pleasure of collaborating with her because I am a research associate with the VUB. So thank you very much for being here. And so to be fully transparent, and as I referred to at the beginning of my introduction, just last week we were all together in Tokyo, and we attended and participated in a series of events discussing NATO Japan in NATO Indo Pacific relations. So I think today is actually a great opportunity to bring back to Paris all the insights that we got from this discussion in Tokyo and check and see the reactions of French and European audience. Especially, I would say the main takeaways that I brought from these discussions. First, I think there is a strong conviction that the transatlantic and Indo-Pacific security are interconnected. I think this is well recognized both by the Indo-Pacific partners and the NATO allies. I see also a consensus on the having a broad definition of security, not only hard security, but also hybrid threat, disinformation, also economic weaponization. A second element is that there is an appetite to work with each other, to deepen understanding from what's going on, situational awareness, what's going on in each other region, and also learn from each other past experience in dealing with several kind of risk. But also see some challenges. Some challenges were discussed. First, the question of the strategic signaling. What does it mean for NATO and AP4 to work closely together? How is this perceived by third actors, by third countries? Second is the management of expectation. It is not so clear. So what NATO is expecting from its Indo-Pacific partners? What are the Indo-Pacific partners expecting really from NATO? We need to be careful to manage that. And finally, sitting here in Paris, the lack of consensus within the NATO member regarding the level of attention that the alliance should devote to the Indo-Pacific. So I hope that we can discuss all that together during the 90 minutes that we have. So I will ask each speaker to start with a 10-minute maximum remark. And then Eva will provide a comment and question, and we will open the Q&A session for those who are in Paris with us, but also for the audience online. And I will encourage them to type their question, to start to think about their question and type them in the Zoom window. So without further ado, I would like to ask Benedetta maybe to start and to provide your perspective and the NATO perspective of why it is important and how was the genesis to reach out to the AP4. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Celine, and thank you for the introduction. I will try to be brief. I must say that it looks like all of you are coping with the Japan jet lag a lot better than I am. So congratulations to you. I'm still very much struggling, but let me try to put my thoughts together. First of all, and thank you for organizing this discussion. I think it's extremely timely, and as you mentioned, extremely politically salient. So I think that the main title the way you pose the question is quite thought-provoking, and it is maybe my starting point here in my quick 10 minutes reflection, and it is NATO going east, right? And my personal reaction to that would be, if by going east we mean, is NATO changing its mandate, expanding the geographical boundaries of collective defense, and transforming beyond what the boundaries of the North Atlantic Treaty are? If that's what going east means, then I would say, in my view, NATO is not going east, and it's not likely to go east. Whereas if by going east, we mean, is NATO adapting to a world in which theaters of Indo Pacific and Euro Atlantic theater, as you rightly say, are more interconnected politically, geostrategically, and from a security perspective, and is NATO readying itself to deal with threats and challenges to the Euro-Atlantic area that stem from outside the Euro-Atlantic area, then I would say, well, that inevitably leads the alliance to pay closer attention to global threats and to evolving dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region. So I just want to start with that reflection and maybe develop it a little bit more. And what I mean is that in terms of the mandate and the mission of NATO, I see really no changes in almost 75 years. And today, when we discuss what is NATO for, I think there is strong consensus. It continues to be the way through which we organize the collective defense of allies, the collective defense of the Euro-Atlantic area, and contributing to peace and stability in the Euro-Atlantic area as well. It continues to be focused about enabling the collective defense against armed attack on territory and population of our allies within the boundaries of the North Atlantic Treaty. So there is a geographical element there that it's important. And I think in that sense, continuity it's very important to start by highlighting continuity. At the same time, I think throughout its 75 years, NATO has always recognized that in order to fulfill its mandate, which remains ensuring the security and defense of allies, it needs to adapt to the challenges of the security environment. So if during the Cold War, it had the luxury, quote unquote, to only worry about one main theater and threat, the Soviet Union, that quote unquote luxury went away after the end of the Cold War with the understanding the security threats and challenges are more diffuse, leading NATO to embrace a crisis management function and also a cooperative security function, and to start to look at how can asymmetric threats from outside the Euro-Atlantic area, so from out of area, impact on the area of responsibility. History lesson over, I promise, but fast forward to 2023, I think today we are in a back to the future situation. In one way, conventional war has returned to Europe. We are clear on the fact that NATO needs to rebuild that muscle in terms of deterrence and defense, to fulfill its primary function, which remains to ensure the territorial defense of Europe. And that's what a lot of the military modernization efforts are focused on. At the same time, I think today we're more and more cognizant of the fact that some of the key security challenges and threats that affect the Euro-Atlantic area are really not bound by geography. That's terrorism, that's cyber threats, that's hybrid threats, that's the security impact of climate change. And because of that, NATO really needs to think about security in a broad sense, like Celine rightly said at the beginning, and also in terms of who can we partner with to more effectively tackle these global challenges. And I think that leads us to think about like-minded, highly capable and competent partners in the Indo-Pacific region. because we face similar challenges. We have toolkits and best practices that we can exchange, and that can lead to mutual benefit. So I think that's definitely a driving force behind the partnership. The last few minutes, only to say, of course, it's not just about cooperation around shared security challenges. NATO is also recognizing that we are in a time defined by growing strategic competition, and that trend is redefining the international order and having a direct impact on Euro-Atlantic security. And that is why, as rightly mentioned, in 2022, NATO for the first time really identifies the People's Republic of China as a systemic challenge to Euro-Atlantic, with a direct impact on Euro-Atlantic security. Again, we are looking at how the rise of the PRC and its coercive tactics globally do impact on the Euro-Atlantic area and on NATO's ability to fulfill its core mandate, which remains collective defense. And again, that leads to think more about the issue of resilience, the issue of countering authoritarian coercion, whether it's energy manipulation, economic weaponization of economic dependencies, whether it is disinformation or cyber attacks. When I put all of these things together, the so what for me, to wrap it up in terms of how does this position NATO with respect to the Indo-Pacific theater and Indo-Pacific partners, I think strategically, it makes us more cognizant that those two theaters are more closely interconnected, and they are the two key theaters of geopolitical competition. I think it makes us more cognizant that security crisis in one theater can have an impact on the other. And that's something that we see with Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. But I would very much posit that a serious security crisis in the Indo-Pacific would affect Euro-Atlantic security just as well. So we need to understand what that means. So that's from a strategic perspective. Practically, that means from a NATO perspective, I think that we need to continue and even boost how we use NATO as a political military alliance, which is what it always was, in terms of having those consultations, building that shared situational awareness of the interconnections between these two theaters and how they affect our core mission, understand how the PRC's activities do affect Euro-Atlantic security. And in all of that, of course, exchanges with partners in the Indo-Pacific are extremely useful because they have that strong understanding of the regional and global dynamics connected to their theater. So in that sense, I think that part of the exchange revolves around building that political and strategic dialogue with those partners. And that's something that we have been doing in recent years very much. And between allies, continue to work to build more transatlantic convergence on how we understand these challenges and also how we deal with them. That doesn't necessarily mean that each response option will be undertaken by NATO or through NATO. The point is to use NATO politically to have a clear set of shared understanding and policy responses. Then many of those policy responses will be implemented nationally through the European Union, through different coalitions. There's many different ways to go about it. So that's part of how we are working to build more transatlantic convergence on the China challenge at large and its impact on Euro-Atlantic security. And exchanges with Indo-Pacific partners are extremely useful in that sense. But I wouldn't frame the partnership and the cooperation with our Indo-Pacific partners solely through the lens of strategic competition. That would be really diminishing what it is. It is broader. There is a broad set of practical cooperation, recognizing many of the shared security challenges we face. And again, it's hybrid threats, it's climate change and security, is improving our disaster preparedness, response options. So it is quite broad. So, and in that sense, I think setting expectation, as Celine said, is extremely important. The direction of our partnership is to deepen political exchanges and broaden and deepen practical cooperation. Is not for NATO to change its mandate or it undertake a military presence in the Indo Pacific. That's not what the partnership is about. I think that's clear to us at NATO, and it's clear to our Indo Pacific partners, but I think it's maybe useful to mention it in a public debate as well. I think I'm sort of out of time, so I'll leave it at there. I will say that in a world in which we see more strategic competition and global and interconnected challenges, we think we don't have the luxury of not taking a global approach. So it's not necessary. So it's not about NATO expanding, it's about NATO enabling to fulfill its core mandate by recognizing that the world we live in today is far more complex and the challenges are far more blurred than they have been for generations. And maybe I'll stop here and recover from my ongoing jet lag.
Thanks a lot, Benedetta. I think it was a very, very good clarification indeed of the main motivation of NATO and on what's going on right now regarding the rapprochement with the AP4, the reason behind, and so on. I have plenty of questions for you already, but maybe one that I would like to have your perspective on is how NATO sees the AP4 engagement or commitment in the transatlantic theater per se. There are more and more. I mean, if NATO is looking more east, the reverse is certainly true. So how do you see this commitment? So now I will turn to Michito Tsuruoka to get the Japanese perspective on this rapprochement. So what are the Japanese interests to deepen the relation with NATO? How relevant is NATO for Japan at all?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation and the kind introduction. Actually, I agree to what Benedetta has just said, 120%. So I think my job is to add some Japanese flavor to what we have already heard. And first, starting with the title of this today's event. So NATO going east, and in this regard as well, the 100% or 120, 150% agree to what Benedetta said, that yesterday NATO is becoming more interested in what takes place in the Indo-Pacific region because NATO is affected and NATO is being more affected by what takes place in the Indo-Pacific region. So if you think that this is about NATO sending troops to Asia, it's not what going to happen, but NATO's interest or the individual European countries' interest in the Indo-Pacific region are set to increase. So this is just a reality. So whether you like it or not, Europe is to be affected more and more in the coming years by what takes place in the Indo-Pacific region. And that is why this is not your choice. This is just a reality. So we often talk about the interconnectedness or interconnectivity between the two theaters, the European theater and the Asian theater or Indo-Pacific theater. So this is just a reality. And this is very much already reflected by NATO's strategic concept, so 2022 strategic concept, and it talks about the challenges to NATO countries' interests, values, and security by China, and also the strategic concept also talks about China's modernization and expansion of nuclear arsenal. So the challenges are there and concerns are there. So it's just natural that the NATO needs to pay more attention to what takes place in the Indo-Pacific region. And yes, I understand that there are some skeptical voices in France, particularly in France, but not limited to France, but some other countries as well. But there are the skeptical voices on what NATO could do in the Indo-Pacific region. Yes, it's quite true that the NATO's engagement in the Indo-Pacific region will not change the military balance of power in the region, which is just obvious. But that doesn't necessarily mean that NATO has no role. So that is my sort of a starting point. And in terms of thinking about Europe's growing engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, and actually France has been playing a crucial role. So France has been sort of driving European discussions and European discourse on the Indo-Pacific region. So France was the first country in Europe to have published an Indo-Pacific strategy, and France, the military engagement in the region has been there for a long time because of the fact that you have territories and you have people, and so France has been sort of a source of inspiration for many other European countries when it comes to security and strategic engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. So that is why I very much understand that France's skeptical position particularly on NATO's engagement in the Pacific region is very much about who do what in the Indo-Pacific region. So you have individual countries, France, Britain, Germany, Netherlands, Italy, and other countries, and you have the European Union as well, and NATO. So different actors have different roles and different responsibilities and the different the advantages and disadvantages. I very much believe that the European Union, the EU, has a huge role to play. So particularly now, in terms of thinking about countering Chinese challenges, the economic security or export control and these the technology-related issues are now becoming more important. And in that regard, of course, the role of the European Union is crucial. And NATO, I don't see any substantial NATO role in this. But this means what this means is that individual countries, the European Union, NATO have their own roles. So if you argue that the European Union should be the sort of a primary tool or venue in terms of thinking about engagement, security engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, I think that that doesn't necessarily rule out NATO's role. So the EU's role and NATO's role are not mutually exclusive, because the two organizations are very different, and the two organizations have very different roles. So in terms of thinking about NATO's role, one of the most important aspect is that, as already mentioned by Benedetta, that it's very much about practical cooperation involving defense authorities and the militaries. So military practical cooperation, and that of course includes standardization and interoperability, because NATO has been doing very much the interoperability and the standardization business from the very beginning. So we tend to sort of pay more attention to NATO-led operations, particularly in Afghanistan or other places, or now that these days that the NATO's role as a sort of a clearinghouse for weapons assistance to Ukraine. But what NATO has been doing from the very beginning is the standardization and interoperability, and that's something that the AP4 countries are very much interested in, because that it's no coincidence that all the four countries, or all the AP4 countries, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, are US allies. Of course, when it comes to New Zealand, it's a bit sort of a gray sort of thing, but still, the Australia, Japan, Korea are very strong US allies in the region, which means that the interoperability and standardization with the United States are, of course, of our concern, and also the NATO's accumulation of what is called STANAGs, the standardization agreements, and that's something that the Japan has been already for a long time been accustomed to that, so of course through the United States. So now we are becoming more interested in not just the taking NATO standard, but also in the future, I think the Japan we need to think more about how we can shape together with NATO countries the next generation of a NATO standardization. So that's quite an interesting sort of promising area, and also having a bit broader perspective. What I wanted to emphasize is that the NATO's engagement in the Indo Pacific region, particularly AP4 countries, is also about something called bridging allies. So sort of bridging and bringing actually various US alliances closer. So yes, the NATO is the primary alliance framework in the Euro-Atlantic region, and the US-Japan alliance, and the US-Korea, and the US-Australia, this set of bilateral US alliances in the Indo-Pacific region. So it makes more sense for us to at least to ensure synergies between different alliances. And that is becoming more important because of for two reasons, and one of which is that the challenges for the US-led rules-based international order are growing, which means that we need to cooperate more. And also at the same time, there are various uncertainties in our countries, in our respective countries, and particularly I understand that you are, and also we are very much concerned about what would happen next year in the United States. So and that's also the sort of another reason why we need to think more about bringing and bridging allies closer and together. And coming back to the very first question, so NATO going east. As Celine mentioned, that the managing expectations is really important. So that is why we need to have a clearer understanding about what it means and what it doesn't mean in terms of thinking about NATO's engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. So they're having a very concrete ideas about what we want to do. So particularly the practical cooperation is something that we are very much focusing on. But again, that we need to understand the broader context within which we discuss NATO's engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, because the growing challenges and uncertainties in our own countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michito. Very great to have your view on that. And I also have some questions for you, but maybe the first would be, what can Japan bring to NATO? So in this context of rapprochement, so that will be for the discussion part. And now I will turn to Hosoya Sensei for maybe a broader vision on how to understand this bridging allies or bridging alliance trend in the context of the challenges of the liberal international order. So what do you make of it?
Well, thank you very much, Celine, for your kind introduction, and also thank you very much for having me in this event. I like to focus on three questions, which I pose. Michito is the very best expert on the Japan-NATO relations, so particularly I have nothing to add to what he said. So I like to assume my task as to place this question in a much broader framework, as Celine mentioned. So first, I like to put three questions. Why is the Indo-Pacific region important for the NATO? Second question is, why is the AP4 important for the NATO? Number three, why is Japan important for the NATO? If all of these three, I mean, Indo Pacific region, AP4, Japan, are not important for the NATO, it means that this event is not also important. So I have to convince you all why these all three are important. I hope I can be successful in convincing you on the importance of these. First of all, why the Indo-Pacific region is important. It is actually written in the document, New Strategic Concept of 2022. Let me cite the sentence, quote, "The Indo-Pacific is important for NATO, given that deep development in the region can directly affect Euro-Atlantic security." So it says that the two regions, Indo-Pacific region and the Euro-Atlantic security, Euro-Atlantic region, are interconnected. To put it more simple, it means that if something happened in the Taiwan Strait, if the United States and China would fight each other, undoubtedly that would affect European countries. It's natural. And also, in addition to this, all the three biggest economies in the world, it means the United States, China, and Japan, are all located in the Indo-Pacific region. And number five, biggest economy, of course, India, is also located in the region. It means that the future of the region, as either stability of the war or instability, would undoubtedly affect the prosperity of the European countries. So we need to hope that we can keep both stability and the prosperity in the region to ensure as well the prosperity and the stability of the Euro-Atlantic region. So this can be natural to say so, but the problem is much deeper because we are seeing the rapid rise of authoritarian regimes as well as the rise of the global South countries. It means that liberal democracies, unlike before, liberal democracies are becoming a minority. We are much more powerless. So we cannot, I mean, the United States, either United States, NATO, EU, or Japan. We, each of us, cannot simply stand safe without the cooperation among other liberal democracies. So cooperation among liberal democracies become much more important than before. And these are written in a strategic document, three strategic documents that we saw last year. Number one, the US National Security Strategy. Number two, as I mentioned, NATO's new strategic concept. And number three, Japan's new national security strategy, which was issued in December last year. In all of these documents, we can see something like this. Like in the United States security, we can see a new important concept of integrated security, integrated deterrence. Deterrent is important, but by integrating American allies and partners' defense capabilities, of course, United States can have much stronger deterrence. So it means that we need to have cooperation among like-minded allies and partners. Also, in NATO's new strategic concept, it is written that partners are important. In many sentences, importance of the NATO's cooperation with partners are written. Without effective cooperation with like-minded partners, I suppose that NATO cannot effectively secure its security in the region as well. And of course, these partners would include Japan and also Australia, New Zealand, and South Korea, AP4. So by having the AP4, NATO can much more effectively and also much cheaply secure its own security. And number three, Japan's national security strategy document. It is also written in the document that, quote, it is important to maintain and develop a free and open international order and strengthen ties with its ally, like-minded countries, and others. So we can see similar trends as we are becoming minority in the international community, and we are becoming much more vulnerable. So we really need to enhance cooperation among like-minded partners. So we need to predict the future like Russia would win the war in Ukraine, and we need to think about the future that China would effectively control Taiwan, and the Taiwanese democracy would die. In this scenario, of course, quite a dark scenario, we will live in much more vulnerable, insecure international environment. So we really need to prevent this from happening. To do that, cooperation would be required much more than before. And thirdly, what I want to say is that Japan is important. Many people have been talking about the decline of Japan. Yes, in some senses, I think that Japan is declining. But previously, when we think about the importance of either Asia-Pacific region and the Indo Pacific region, we mentioned about the importance of Chinese cooperation. And we had much more optimistic vision that China would willingly cooperate with us, and China would become like us. We had been hoping for Chinese political and economic reform, but this actually didn't happen. So that's why in the newest national security documents of the United States, NATO, and Japan, we actually now are becoming much more realistic about the expectation of a cooperation with China. For the first time, China is assumed as a challenge in the NATO's strategic concept. And then 13 years before, this was not written in the document. In the sense, if China cannot willingly cooperate with the NATO, Japan needs to take a much heavier responsibility to play a role in the region to stabilize and to secure prosperity there. I stop here. Thank you.
Okay. Many thanks, Yuichi, for that very clear demonstration that this event today is really important and that you were right to join us. I'm interested by your reference about cooperation among democracies that are key. You mentioned democracies and like-minded countries, and I would maybe ask you what is the role of values, you know, in all that, because we're talking a lot about the so-called global South. Might not be all democracies, but maybe many of all would be like-minded countries at some point. So how do you rate the value issue? Well, to not last but not least again, Eva, I'm sure you have a lot of comments and questions to launch the discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Celine, and many thanks to Ifri. It's always a pleasure to be back and good to see friends that I've seen on the other side of the world just a few days ago. It's always a challenge to speak last and to be supposed to discuss colleagues that you value greatly and that are really top of their field. So I should probably start that I agree pretty much with everything that has been said. So there's a great degree of convergence already among us. That's a good start. But perhaps just to elaborate on some aspects that have not been mentioned too much or chip in and complement a little bit. And the first is related to the China challenge that has been mentioned by all three speakers. But it seems to me, and it is also the case in the NATO strategic concept, that the China challenge is always mentioned in a more kind of indirect, global, systemic terms, right? Benedetta has mentioned the cyber, technological, economic security aspects, some of the legal aspects, etc. But I think it's important when we talk about NATO specifically, according to its mandate, its operational mandate, is that China, in fact, does, in a way, pose a direct challenge to NATO and to Euro-Atlantic security as well. And that direct challenge, well, there's few ways to look at it. And the first is, well, already by its long-range capabilities. Let's not forget that you know, the US-China rivalry is part of this debate, at least for China. So the fact that NATO, that the United States are part and one of the most important members of NATO is definitely, from China's perspective, very important. So yes, China does have long-range capabilities. It does have aircraft carriers. In fact, has 2 already military-ready ones, and it will acquire more. It has submarines, it has long-range missiles, etc. So, I mean, let's not completely forget about the military and operational aspect of the China challenge. The second, which has not, or kind of has been mentioned, but I would like to emphasize it more, is the Russia-China rapprochement in this context, including in military terms. Scientific cooperation, military cooperation, joint exercises that we see a lot around Japan, but not only, sorry. We have seen it in the Baltics. This is something that we will see perhaps more. We see it bilaterally in the Arctic as well. I mean, this is yet one example, but I think it's important if we focus on the Euro-Atlantic and we keep emphasizing that the geographical focus of NATO is the Northern Atlantic. Well, then let's have a look at the map and just shift it a little bit more up. And you see that the Arctic is right there. With a rather sophisticated system of hydroacoustic modeling that can be used for submarine warfare, and where then Russia-China is becoming or gaining sufficient strategic advantage. But it's also cooperation and coordination beyond the bilateral channel within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, within the BRICS+++, within the Chinese global security initiative, you name it. And that, so that's the direct one. Then the indirect challenge, and I'll get back to this because it brings us back to the southern global south discussion as well. The indirect one is related to China's kind of modus operandi that is very unique, very hybrid on its own, and it's the use of civilian agencies, facilities, infrastructure that we see, as really one of the common approaches. And that does pose, again, a direct threat, or indirect, if you want, to NATO. Be it just, for instance, the Chinese control of some of the strategically important facilities in Europe, port communication, which may impair on NATO's military mobility and readiness in terms of crisis, and that we should be watching. Which brings me to what Michito and Yuichi and pretty much everyone, and Benedetta as well, alluded to, is the importance of working together with partners. Of course, Japan, but also the EU, and it has been mentioned especially by Michito, because these are some of the domains that NATO cannot address itself, also for legal reasons, because we're talking about civilian facilities. So this is something that perhaps we should dig a little bit deeper. And brings me to my second point, which is the importance of communication. I think Yuichi just mentioned that it's important to have these sort of events to convince ourselves, but I think we are preaching to the convinced. Let's not forget, and again, it has been mentioned by all of the presentation, the degree of which this conversation has been misinterpreted or willingly reinterpreted by China and others. And we cannot just simply dismiss it as an anti-NATO propaganda. It's easy for us, but it does have a certain echo among those many countries out there. And when I mention, SCO, BRICS+, all these new formations, it's often difficult to grasp in a more scientific way, but yes, let's face it, I mean, there is a degree of this anti-Western sentiment, and China does portray itself and puts itself as a position of a leader of a global South and defender of global South values, whatever that means. So it is something that demands a continuous focus, a continuous effort on our side. Yuchi has put a lot of emphasis on saying that liberal democracies are a minority. I fully agree with that, but precisely because of that, we absolutely need to be very, very diligent on how we communicate on this rapprochement. So it is not NATO going east, it's more east going towards us or NATO, but there's a lot of homework that needs to be done there. So question-wise, I mean, all these are actually questions. All these are things that we need to be mindful of when discussing and when, among us and towards the outside. I think one important part of it, and again, it's a question to all of us, is what Michito brought up, is the repartition of roles and the overlapping agendas, memberships of NATO, EU, and the individual member states. This is something that I think, I don't know if we could, set up a steering group on the Indo Pacific. And of course, we understand that the repartition of roles is not easy. On economic security, maybe, but all these topics overlap in, cyber, etc. So it's a difficult one, but we need to do that homework somehow, also to make our work with our partners eastwards easier, because not they are getting lost in this, and we are sometimes getting lost in this. So I guess that's a very important part of the agenda. I'll probably stop there. Thank you.
Excellent, Eva. Thanks a lot. We are all together already raised some questions to the panelists, and I see one question already online that I will relay because it might be of interest to Benedetta to address it. And it's about the challenge that the European boss face on the European continent with the war in Ukraine right now, and the rising challenges of China, So the question is about especially the Eastern European countries and their views about China's rising risk or threat, and how they manage that compared to the Russian threat, which is very, very concrete and really next door. So how to take into consideration there also threat perceptions about it. So maybe I will start with that and the question we already launched, and go back to you, Benedetta, and then Michito, Yuichi, and we'll open the floor to the public right after.
Thank you. Right. So that's a very important question. I'll be very brief. I think that the centrals, of course, and this emerges also in the NATO strategic concept and in subsequent documents. It's clear that today NATO faces the most direct and strategic threat, and in NATO language that has a military connotation, is the Russian Federation, in terms of what constitutes a direct threat to the security and defense of allies. So it's clear that that's in the hierarchy of what NATO is focused on, is a pressing threat. And indeed, the NATO strategic concept talks about terrorism and Russia as the two main threats defined in military terms that NATO faces. When we talk about China, the People's Republic of China, we're talking about a systemic challenge, in the sense that we're talking about the political, economic, geopolitical, and military elements of what is the PRC's coercive tactics and posturing on the global stage, and how that affects Euro-Atlantic security. So there is already a clarification, I think, in how the strategic documents talk about it. But my sense, going to the question of how do different allies in our eastern flank perceive the China challenge, and whether they perceive it as somewhat, if I understand the question correctly, as taking us away from core business, I would say that I don't see that as much. in our discussions. I think there is a strong understanding that, for example, the Chinese involvement from the economic, geopolitical, political perspective in supporting Russia is one of the elements that enables the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. So in that sense, there is a clear interest in understanding how this strategic alignment between Russia and China is developing, very much like Eva mentioned. And that's one of the ways to say that, well, what the PRC is doing on the global stage has a direct impact on our security as well. I think some countries, specifically on our eastern flank, have had recent encounters with different tools of PRC authoritarian coercion, and therefore they are particularly cognizant of those challenges and the potential impact on their broader security and defense. So in that sense, I don't see so much a great divide on this issue. And there is a strong understanding within NATO that the military adaptation and prioritization is towards rebuilding that deterrence and defense posture to be able to deal with the main threats we face. So in that sense, I think that it's not so much a pitting one objective against the other, but more seeing them as separate work strands. And that also brings me very quickly to the question you raised, which is what would be and I think it's all tied to the same reflection. How do we see the role of our Indo-Pacific partners in Euro-Atlantic security? And I think that's something that I really think it's a really important point to make. We have we have a war of aggression on our continent. And we are, of course, prioritizing supporting Ukraine and boosting our deterrence and defense to be able to respond to that. But let's not forget, we're not doing that alone as a transatlantic community. Our Indo-Pacific partners have stepped up. And that's, I think, the type of convergence between different allies that we're talking about in this panel. I think no European ally is expecting our Indo-Pacific partner to send troops or or change their military posturing to respond to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. But what they are doing is imposing sanctions on Russia, sometimes at great cost and also political domestic cost. They are standing up with us in the international fora, calling for Russia to be held accountable and to stop its war of aggression. They're contributing to an integrated deterrence posture through non-kinetic means. And I think that's very much the expectation. Now, I don't know I cannot speak on behalf of our Indo-Pacific partners, but my sense would be that if a similar contingency were to play out in the Indo-Pacific theater, the expectation would be that the transatlantic community and European allies specifically would think about very much what tools they can bring to bear to contribute to deterrence, ranging from the kinetic to the non-kinetic. So I think that's a very good case study, if you wish, of how transatlantic and trans-Pacific solidarity can work together to uphold the rules-based international order. And I'll stop here.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Benedetta. Now I'd like to turn to Michito. Actually, if I can add another question posed online for you. So you mentioned that the standardization and interoperability is an important aspect for Japan and the AP4. What does the cooperation with NATO offers in advantage to what the US currently brings as an ally to the AP4 and maybe to Japan particularly?
Okay, thank you very much. So three or four things. And first on Celine's question about what Japan could bring to NATO. There are, I think, three or four things, and one of which is the Japan could help NATO in terms of early warning on the development in the Indo-Pacific region. So that was one of the purposes of NATO-Japan policy dialogues and to compare notes on the various regions, of course, including the Indo-Pacific region. So NATO, as far as I understand that NATO would like to to improve and enhance its early warning capability on situations in the Indo-Pacific region, and Japan is very much a great partner for that in that regard. And also assistance to Ukraine is already mentioned. That yes, Japan is not sending weapons to Ukraine, but still, the Japan's assistance is really substantial, and also for those European countries which are interested in expanding military engagement in the Pacific region, particularly France, UK, and some others. So the Japan is in a position to enable such operations or deployments, and so in that sense, the role of Japan is also quite important, and also the political an aspect of Japan's value for NATO is that by cooperating and by getting Japan on board, the NATO can say that NATO is not just about Americans and Europeans. So it's much broader. That there are some other countries which have different history and different culture or whatever are also on board. So that sort of political messaging is quite an importance, and that was one of the reasons that when back in the period when NATO was doing Afghanistan operation, ISAF in Afghanistan, that the Japan didn't send troops to Afghanistan, but still the Japan closely cooperated with NATO efforts in Afghanistan, and the political message at that time was that NATO is not a sort of a Christian alliance doing operations in Islamic State. No, that's not the case. That Japan and other countries are also on board, and that sort of a political messaging was really important, and that sort of a element continues. And secondly, on the communications that they ever raised, yes, it's really a crucial issue, and that is why we need to, so NATO and AP4 countries need to correct if you find any unfounded claims about NATO going east, then we need to always continue our efforts to correct or redress such misperceptions. But at the same time, I believe that, of course, it's not in NATO's or AP4's interest to be seen as too assertive or too aggressive, but at the same time, it's not in NATO's interest either to be seen as too soft on China or too accommodating Chinese various claims and activities. So of course, we need to strike a balance between the two. And the long-range capability that China has, yes, the NATO strategic concept actually expresses concerns about the modernization and expansion of NATO, China's nuclear arsenal. So and that is a really important thing, because I think as Yuichi mentioned that if something really serious happens over Taiwan or any other parts of the Indo-Pacific region, then assume that the US forces would get involved, not just by sending weapons, but sending troops, then that will have a huge impact to not only US posture in this region, but also in broader terms as well, which means that it's in NATO or European countries' interest to try to deter such serious contingency from happening. So that is why I very much believe that now it's time for NATO or NATO countries to put this sort of a China consideration in their the planning and in their deterrence and defense posture discussions. Okay, and so the final question, I think the online question.
The online question, okay, was about standardization and interoperability, and what does bring the NATO cooperation with NATO compared to the US?
Yeah, the standardization and interoperability, yes, the first and foremost, it's a technical thing, but at the same time, it the meaning goes more beyond that, because it is also about more soft and human aspect there as well. And in that context, the assuming that Japan might get involved in multilateral operations, then how NATO works and the way in which NATO works in multilateral context and planning and operations. And that's also something that we are very much interested in. And yes, the US-Japan context, yes, the US-Japan alliance has been there for many years, and the Japanese forces have been really accustomed to working with the US forces. But of course, we cannot rule out the possibility that we might need to do operations with other countries as well. And in that context, the knowing more about NATO's way of doing and the planning and doing operations in multilateral context is also of a huge interest for Japan. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michito. Excellent. Yuichi?
Yes.
Celine, you gave me a question relating to the place of value in NATO's strategy towards the East or Asia. This is an important question because value usually occupy a very important place in North Atlantic Treaty. And at the same time, I like to remind you on the importance of a Bali Democratic Forum of 2008, when Indonesian government assembled 32 Asian countries, including China, to discuss on the importance of democracy. All of the countries agree on the democracy from much more pluralistic point of view. So China didn't deny or reject the concept of democracy. Maybe Japan can bring a much more pluralistic or inclusive understanding about some of the important norms, such as human rights and democracy and rule of law. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, that Western dominance is in decline. And particularly China is trying, both China and Russia are trying to undermine the Western dominance in the international community. And this is, I suppose that this is continuing to happen. So in the sense, maybe we need to take into account of some of the interests and the perspectives of global South countries, of course, including India. But at the same time, we need to think about the quite contradictory aspects of China's strategy, because on one hand, perhaps maybe China's first strategy is to secure its political regime. To secure its political regime, maybe China would be willing to collaborate with Europe, the United States, and Japan as well. But at the same time, to have much more important influence in the international community, maybe China continue to undermine both the US and European positions in the international community. And particularly in the Middle East and the Southeast Asian and African countries, Chinese influence has been rapidly expanding. So in the sense, sometimes China's interests strategic goals are contradictory to the NATO's strategic goals. So this is quite a contradictory aspects of China's strategy. So to some extent, we can collaborate deeply with China, but at the same time, we need to be aware of China's long-term strategy to undermine Western positions in the international community, particularly by damaging some of the claims such as human rights and democracy, rule of law in the international community. So our strategy to Russia can be much more simplistic. We need to stop Russia from the winning war in the Ukraine.
So in that sense, we need to pursue this goal, but our strategy to China would be much more difficult to fully understand, to define. In the sense, to some extent, we need to collaborate with China, but at the same time, we need to fully realize the difficulty of collaborating with China as long as China is trying to undermine both American and European positions in the international community. Do I have any other questions? No? Okay.
I think it's...
Okay, thank you.
It's fine. You will have more chance to add comment. Eva, do you want to bring some element, and then we will open the floor here.
Just very quickly on two things. On the issue of deterrence that Benedetta mentioned, I think it's really important to realize the degree of psychological deterrence that this rapprochement may entail. I think if there's one lesson that Japan and other countries around the world have learned from Ukraine is that NATO works. And if you talk with colleagues also across Southeast Asia or Taiwan, some of them would not say it loud, but they do welcome NATO's interests in the region because they, as Benedetta said, realize that perhaps if there is a problem, NATO will try to think of what can be done. I mean, of course, within the limits. And the other is NATO versus US from Japanese perspective. I'd say they're separate, but very complementary, of course. NATO is the multilateral framework that is one of the pillars of the Japanese foreign security policy. And if you look at the memberships, it kind of brings together all the network of bilateral relationships that Japan is deepening on the security front with France, with Germany, with UK, etc. So it is a bit of a platform that builds or helps to sustain this kind of, I would say, democratic arsenal or this network of plurilateral alliances and partnerships that we see shaping up, and hence back to the issue of coordination of what to do with who.
Great, thanks a lot. So now I'm turning to the public. Is there any question? Yeah, one question over there. Thanks a lot for the mic. Question from John Seaman, my colleague at the IFRI Center for Asian Studies here.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Thank you for all of these very interesting and thought-provoking comments. I'd like to focus in on something that Eva, you talked about in terms of communication, and link that back to something that Benedetta said about strategic signaling. And the question of whether or not there is a need or a utility in talking directly to China at the NATO level, if that's even possible. Because in discussions with Chinese colleagues, they read NATO's increasing engagement and interest in East Asia with increasing alarm. And I think there's also a need to explain and help China understand exactly what you said, Eva. This isn't necessarily about NATO going east, it's about the East coming to NATO. And to help them understand where we're coming from, because my sense is that they see NATO exclusively through Russian eyes. All the information they get about NATO is probably through a Russian interpretation. So I think it's also important to help China understand how we perceive the challenge coming from China and sit down and actually explain that. They probably get a lot of that through track 2 dialogues, things like people from us. They probably get a lot from the nation state level, but is there a utility in actually having NATO reach out and say, you see a challenge coming from us, we see a challenge coming from you, let's talk about this. And let's try to figure out where we're both coming from. Or is that even possible? Thanks.
Thanks a lot. I think we'll try to gather, some questions. David Cameron, over there. Yes, David.
Thank you. David Cameron from the series Sciences Po. Lovely to see you all. Love to see Eva, particularly. Eva is far too modest. Eva invented the term European strategy towards the Indo Pacific several years before Europeans started talking about it. So, okay. Just a point and several questions. If we look at the photo here, we have on the left the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and the Korean President on the right. Eva talked about questions of of image of NATO. And seen from Australia, Australia was involved in the war in Afghanistan. That was not a great success, you know. So involvement with NATO is not necessarily seen as being positive from those who've been involved in NATO activities. And, you know, NATO does suffer an image problem. It is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is perceived as a vestige of the Cold War. And you know, maybe President Macron has a point that maybe we should be talking more about European cooperation in the Indo Pacific rather than through NATO. But just a quick couple of questions to Soruko Sensei. You talked about the question of democracy. The one effort of that was the Quad, which Australia, India, United States, and Japan, the four great democracies, in inverted commas. And yet, you know, the democracy agenda, the human rights agenda in the Quad is totally inexistent. It's about, you know, sort of cooperation in a number of areas. But so where do values come into this when we talk about relations with NATO, if it's about promoting democracy? And the second question, I think to Hosoya Sensei, is about defense cooperation. Let me play the devil's advocate. NATO has more to gain from Asia than the other way around. If we look today, Korea is now becoming the world's fourth largest arms producer. The defense cooperation agreement with Poland, the massive sale of weaponry to Poland, is significant of that. The cooperation agreement between the UK, Italy, and Japan for a fifth-generation fighter aircraft is also important. So, you know, maybe let's be a bit more modest. Maybe there's more to be gained the other way around. So I'd like your opinion on that. And to all of the panelists, the term Southeast Asia and ASEAN has not been mentioned by any of you, okay? You know, we are talking, you know, about a country like Indonesia, the world's third largest democracy, the world's largest Muslim country. And ASEAN has, as part of its DNA, a kind of non-alignment kind of idea. So where does Southeast Asia fit in to, you know, NATO looking east? Thank you.
Many thanks, David, for this question. Is there any other question in the room? If not, I can add some of the questions that were raised online, and maybe following up on your point, David, about the Asia, how the Asian partners are contributing to European security. One question reads, each of the Koreas is arming opposing sides of the Ukraine war. So to what extent does the re-emergence of military tension on the Korean Peninsula represent a threat to the interest of NATO's security? Or I would put it more broadly, how do you see the, you know, the interconnectedness between the role of the two Koreas and what's going on right now in Ukraine? And I can also maybe another point on the next step and the priority area to step up the cooperation with the AP4. Benedetta, how do you see, can you provide some concrete maybe example of what's going on already and what could be the next step? And with that, I would like to go back for a last round with our panelists. You can address, of course, the questions that were raised to you, or pick up some other if you feel like. So, Benedetta?
Sure, I'll be brief and try to take those that are addressed, that I think were addressed to me. Does NATO have interactions with the PRC in terms and dialogue? The answer is yes. I would say it's not. I would say it's limited, of course, but it does exist at a staff-to-staff level. It also exists in interactions that the Secretary General has had, including at the margins of the UN General Assembly and the Munich Security Conference. There are interactions. dedicated exactly to explaining NATO's understanding of this shift in security environment and its cooperation with its partners, including in the Indo Pacific region. So there are these opportunities. And in the strategic concept, it's very clear that as part of, there are different pillars of what are element of a NATO strategy when it comes to dealing with the China challenge. It is about building resilience, working more with partners, enhance preparing and future-proofing our ability to do deterrence and defense. But it is also about remaining open to dialogue on the basis of our interests with the People's Republics of China. And we do that. I would say that in terms of the amplification of Russian narratives over the war in Ukraine, however, it is very clear where the PRC stands. They are from day one be actively involved in not just receiving but amplifying the Russian narratives on the war in Ukraine. So that does point to a strategic convergence that of course we find worrisome. But yes, we remain open to dialogue and engagement and do so within the boundaries of what is possible. So that continues this very year. It hasn't stopped. So that was one. Is there an image problem of NATO with our Indo-Pacific partners? That's not what our political engagements say. That's not what our partners tell us. They do want to cooperate more with us. That's not what our public opinion polling tells us in terms of perceptions in Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. So in that sense, that's not what the data I have shows me. What it shows me is that there is a growing interest in working with us because of the mutual benefits and realizations that we do contribute to each other's security. So I don't find that to be a problem. You asked about what are the next steps. We're very much working on those right now. So I have to be a little bit vague because it's the work in preparation for the Washington summit. But we have different level of practical cooperation with each of the four partners. I would say, looking at the year ahead, I see especially Australia and Japan wanting to continue and do more in areas like cyber security, countering hybrid threats, promoting interoperability. There's talk about how can we exchange best practices on defense industry. So there's quite a lot that it ranges from the strategic to the operational, and I think that's very much the direction of travel that we're going to implement in the next months. That's how quickly I could go.
Thanks a lot, Benedetta. It was very, very quick indeed, but very insightful. Thank you. Michito?
Oh, thank you very much for challenging, interesting questions. And first on the idea of NATO talking to China. I think it's a great idea, and I understand that NATO has been talking to China somewhat for many years. And looking at China's discourse on NATO, there are two aspects. One of which is that there's a genuine misunderstanding about what NATO is and what NATO does and how NATO works. So in that regard, talking to China is really important, particularly thinking about NATO Indo Pacific engagement. Then one of the very peculiarly Chinese misconception is that Europeans are just following the United States in their engagement in the Indo-Pacific region, and or the US is forcing Europeans to get on board in the Indo-Pacific region. Yes, there is some sort of element in various parts of Europe, that's for sure, but at the same time, I think it's in Europe's interest to redress such understanding. And one of the biggest reasons why Chinese believe that way is that China has very, very little experience of managing alliances, because China has, I'm not sure to what extent North Korea can be seen and said to be China's ally, but other than that, China has very little experience of alliances. So that is why their sort of a conception is that always that very hierarchical alliance they have in their mind. So the talking to Chinese that NATO is not it's not such an alliance, and that is important. But at the same time, they're looking at the Chinese discourse on NATO. There is a element of intentional misunderstanding that China just pretends that they don't understand. But that is a sort of a more sort of the bad intentioned thing. So talking to Chinese will not solve that problem. So we need to be careful that there are two elements, but still the talking to Chinese, I think it's good for NATO and good for China as well. And arms and which side gains more? Yes, there's a important question. So because this partnership, anyway, for this partnership to be sustainable, it needs to be two-way streets rather than just unilateral the reliance. But when it comes to GCAP, the Japan, UK, Italy fighter jet project, it's I think a very complementary, because Japan, of course, has some capabilities, some technologies that other two countries not necessarily have. But when it comes to executing this international big equipment project, Japan doesn't have any experience. So in that sense, the Japan needs to rely very much on particularly the UK, and also the selling products to third countries. I mean, other than Japan, UK, and Italy, the Japan also has no experience in selling the substantial equipment to other countries, despite the fact that Japan has been trying to sell some equipment. But it's largely quite complementary, and the ROK and DPRK, the South Korea, North Korea, so supporting different sides in the war in Ukraine. Yes, that causes a huge concern, and particularly that the ammunition production capability is very limited in our countries, Europe, the United States, and Japan. Those are like-minded countries, and so South Korea actually is one of the very few countries on our side which has maintained what could be called war economy. So they have spare production capability, and the importance of that is increasing. But the very unfortunate reality is that we don't have much leverage in terms of preventing North Korea from exporting ammunition to Russia. So this is very a serious situation, but the role of South Korea in exporting weapons and ammunition to the United States and to some countries in Europe, particularly Poland, and the importance of that is very much increasing. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Michito. It's already noon, but I will take my responsibility as a chair to extend a little bit our session today, so that we finish with a wrap-up conclusion from Hayashi.
Well, thank you very much, Céline. Of course, lunch is the most important thing, so I must be brief. First, of course, every question sounds extremely valuable, insightful, but I need to pick up just a few. Number one, communication with China, strategic signaling with China. I think that it is quite difficult at this moment for the NATO to have a direct communication with China for some reason. Number one, since NATO's bombing of Chinese embassy in Belgrade in 1999, China has been always demonizing the NATO. So it would be quite dangerous for President Xi or any political leaders in China to directly talk with NATO or NATO officials or NATO's Secretary General for this reason, number one. Number two, since President Xi has been extensively centralizing China's political power at the center. So that's why Now it is quite difficult for any countries, including Japan, to have a dialogue with China, like a defense minister or foreign minister, because they don't have power. So they cannot decide. Only she can decide. So in a sense, of course, this time, President Xi visited the United States. It's a good news, but at the same time, it's often sometimes quite annoying to see that the Chinese diplomats or ministers say something quite loud without any agreements, because they don't have a power to agree. So now, for these reasons, I think that even though it is necessary to continue to try to find a communication with China, but at the same time, and we shouldn't deny it, but still, we need to remind of the difficulty of obtaining chances to have those strategic link of communication with China. Number two, I think ASEAN is extremely important. Japan's Asia strategy has been always putting the ASEAN centrality at the center, because ASEAN has been always the hub of Asian regional cooperation. At the same time, ASEAN really doesn't like to alienate China or antagonize China. So as long as we respect ASEAN centrality, we cannot simply exclude or deny Chinese participate in the cooperation, regional cooperation in Asia. So our cooperation with ASEAN is extremely important, but one of the biggest problem would be that the United States, particularly US president, has been skipping many times his meeting with ASEAN leaders, and this would be really harmful for the United States to expand or maintain its presence or influence there. So in that sense, I think Japan has been replacing some of the previous American role in trying to tie the ASEAN with us. I mean, with the liberal democratic side, but still, it is a big difficult challenge. And then lastly, I'd like to mention a little about Korea, because North Korea, Iran, and some other countries can now gain a breathing space, because it is quite unlikely that the United Nations Security Council can agree. As long as they cannot agree, it means that the United States cannot provide any sanctions to these countries. So they naturally think that it's their time to act. I mean, North Korea, Iran, and so on, regardless of the existence of some of the sanctions upon them. So in the sense, the antagonism among the United Nations Security Council permanent members, this is really harmful when we think about the importance of solidarity to sanction some of the countries which violate international law.
Thanks, Yuichi. Eva, some final words?
Super quick. Talking to China, sure. Would it make much effect? Probably not. Because you mentioned Russia. I don't think that China is only copying from Russia, but really the main probably lens through which it sees NATO is really the US in that sense. So as long as we're sticking, I mean, as long as Beijing is really viewing anything through the US prism, then we are probably, we're dealing with a cognitive bias. That means that no matter how much informed you are, you will use the information to serve your interests. So in that sense, but it's an interesting idea. More internally, actually, for the symbolic value, saying, yes, we tried. Also for our own internal uses. Southeast Asia, ASEAN, thank you, David. It's good to see you. And we always agree with David that we should focus on ASEAN and Southeast Asia more. So here we go, but probably not exactly with this NATO context. I'm wondering to what extent it is the right platform. Japan does look a lot at the region. The EU looks a lot at the region. There's ongoing work, and there should be work also on trilateral level. But I'm not sure it is the right platform for many reasons, and I'm happy to elaborate on them perhaps after this, but I understand the time is running out, but also that it builds on pre-existing practical cooperation with Japan and Korea, etc. ASEAN is a slightly different animal from in the kind of more military strategic terms in this. context. Thank you.
Great. Many thanks, Eva. Well, I think we had a very fascinating discussion, very, very fruitful, and I'm very thankful to all our panelists to wake up quite early this morning despite the jet lag and to join us for this session. And thanks a lot to the audience to connect and to be with us during this session. I would like you to join me to give a round of applause to our panelists and also to the technical team support at IFRI, which allowed for this perfect setup this morning. Thanks a lot.